Okay, so continuing with the Hararei Kedem on the issue of the bracha of Sefiras Omer. Okay, we'll review all the steps. Okay, so step one. Shulchan says that if you start off saying the bracha on Sefiras Omer with having in mind one day, and then you conclude with a different day, then you do not go back and make the bracha again.
All right.
And that doesn't matter whether you conclude with the right day or conclude with the wrong day. Either way, you don't make the bracha again. Okay, that's step one. That's how we paskin. The Beis Yosef says that this is based, Beis Yosef is the same person as the Shulchan Aruch, says that this is based on the Raviyah, who compares this to a case where you start off making a Birkas Nenin on thinking that you're going to make a bracha on one food, and then you realize you have to make a bracha on another food. And there's a suffix in whether you go based on how you started off the bracha or how you concluded the bracha. And the Raviyah, and that suffix is not resolved. So the Raviyah says that so with regular brachos on food, you would say suffix brachos lekula. You wouldn't make another bracha because brachos are derabanan. But he says since Sefiras Omer is deraisa, then you go lechumra and you make a bracha again. Okay, all right. So the question, so the Taz says, what does one thing have to do with the other? Okay, he says that in the case, first of all, birkas and mitzvah are not ma'akev, right? They don't prevent you from fulfilling your obligation. If I don't know, like let's say I put on tefillin without making a bracha, I'm still yotzei tefillin. If I light Shabbos candles without making a bracha, I'm still yotzei Shabbos candles. So why, like each thing is on its own. Fine, you lost the opportunity to make the bracha, but that's it, you know. And your sefiras should, whether you yotzei sefiras should depend on whether you counted the right day, and like you know, and that should also determine, if I guess if you didn't count the right day at all, then make a bracha. And actually, I'm not even sure what he would say about making a bracha, but whatever, it's two separate things. So he says that, and he says, what does this have to do with the case of making a bracha on food? There, you actually like change the text that you're going to say. You were going to say Brei Pri Agafen, and then you ended up saying Shal Kol Niyeh B'Vero. Those are two separate brachos. Here, in either case, whether you got the day right or wrong, you were making the bracha Asher Kiddushan B'Mitzvah Al Sefiras Omer. So the two cases seem to have nothing to do with each other, and it's a problem. Mm-hmm. Okay, so right, yeah. Hold on, I think we're missing one step before we get to the answer. And then the okay, fine, all right, yeah, well, it's okay to skip that. Okay, so the answer, you want to say the answer?
Yeah, that he basically, I forget who gives it. But
the Gra. Yeah.
Basically his bracha was different. He had a bracha that included the day, the count in it.
Exactly, right. So his whole thing was, let's just actually reread it again just so we could rev up into the new part, because this is the last paragraph we did. Ulam yu'in b'bir hagra sham debir machmas kushya acheres shehiksha al haravia. So the Gra explains there, based on a different kushya, on the Raviyah, he explains Dema ichbas lan im Sefiras Omer midoraisa. Oh, so that was the other question, right? Is that who cares if Sefiras Omer is doraisa? Hasof kosof habrachos atmam inan ela midirabanan. Brachos on mitzvos are all derabanan. Everyone holds that. So he says, "V'lama pasak Raviyah lechumra lefisha Sefiras Omer midoraisa." How can the Raviyah say you got to go back and say another bracha because Sefiras Omer is doraisa? Again, let's use the analogy here. If I put on tefillin's de'oraisa. If I don't say the bracha on tefillin, I'm missing a derabanan. Or let's say I'm in doubt whether I said the bracha or not. I don't make a bracha again because we say that the brachos are suffix derabanan lekula. So the fact that tefillin is de'oraisa shouldn't matter. Here too, why should you have to count with the bracha again just because sphira is de'oraisa, according to him? So that's where he gives his answer. He says, Ubir hagrad haravia leniently. L'chumra is stringently, and l'kula is leniently. In this case, l'kula would be you don't say another bracha. L'chumra would be you do say another bracha. Yeah. Okay. So he says ubir b'bir hagra haravia l'shitaso azil shesover shenusach haspirahu shehayom kach v'kach la'omer. So the Gra is saying that the Raviyah is going according to his shita that the text of the counting is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushan b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al Sefiras haomer shehayom yom sheni laomer, or whatever. Okay, so that it's part of the bracha. L'shita zo hasfira atma hi siyum habracha. According to this opinion, the count is the end of the bracha. That the Rabbanan set it up to fulfill Sefiras Omer through the format of bracha. And then he goes on and says that this is like Kiddush and like Havdalah, or Kiddush is the better example, where you say Asher Kiddush on b'mitzvasav v'ratzavanu v'shbas kochovi avav. You segue from the Birkas and mitzvah into the actual Kiddush itself. So let's say you made the analogy would be like this. Let's say you said Asher Kiddush on b'mitzvasav v'tzivanu, or Asher Kiddush on b'mitzvasav v'ratzavanu, and then you segued into Yom Tov Kiddush, when it was really Shabbos. So then you could argue, yeah, you got to make Kiddush again because you said the wrong Kiddush. We wouldn't say, oh, Birkas and mitzvah are just the Rabbanan, you should be lenient. No, the Kiddush is part of the text of the bracha that starts off with the Birkas and mitzvah. So it's one unit. So to here,
because we were saying that you're saying Tzman of the day, and since that's the way you do it, which is a derisive thing,
yeah,
you do have to go back to redo it because you're really redoing the derisive.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's provided that you hold that it's still Raisa, and provided you hold Sefiras Omer still Raisa, which is what we're doing. Yeah. Ella tiknu b'matbeah shabracha, kach Sefiras Omer milchatchila tiknu b'matbeah shabracha. So too, the Gra explains that the Rabia holds that Sefiras Omer, they established it to be said in the format of bracha. L'chein habracha chashuva kasafik d'oraisa. Therefore, a suffix about the bracha is considered a suffix d'oraisa, kamo ikra hasfira, just like the sphera itself. The habracha hi chelak mehasfira, that the bracha is a component of the sphera. Okay, so that's why the Rabbi says you have to do it again, and that's as far as we got yesterday. Okay, so now he goes on. He says, "V'im kain." So this is going to be interesting now. V'im kain. We're not quite at the Rambam yet. Nicha ma'od dimyono shel haravia lata'a b'chamra b'shikra. Okay, so we said this yesterday, but we're just reading it now. Therefore, the Ravia's comparison of the Omer case to the case of wine and beer makes sense. Hararei hasfira hi atma hachasima shel habracha, because the Rabbi holds that the count is the conclusion of the bracha. V'hachanami, and here too, hu pasach bebracha al manas lachtom b'chasima shel etmol. Here he's starting off his bracha with the intention to conclude with the conclusion of yesterday. Shel yom revi'i la'omer v'ein hapsicha mitzurefes l'chasima shechasam levasof chamishi la'omer. And therefore the opening is not connected to the conclusion of today is the fifth day of the Omer. Because the counting is the conclusion of the bracha according to the Rabia. Okay, so we said all that yesterday, even though we didn't read it. Okay, now he has another question. One step closer to the Rambam. Ella de akati tzarich iyun b'shitas mechaber shehetik as divrei haravia. Okay, so but we still need to understand the shulchan Aruch, who paskins like the Rabia. Who copies the words of the Rabia. Haladidan ein hasfira miguf hachavta shel habracha. That according to us, sphera is not part of the bracha at all. Okay, so in other words, like this.
What's haladidan?
Say it again.
Haladidan.
But according to us, in hasfira miguf hachavta shel bracha. So in other words, why is the Beis Yosef even bringing in the Rabia on this issue? We don't count like the Rabia. We have a bracha and then we have a count, and there's two separate things. So the Beis Yosef shouldn't care. The Shulchan Aruch shouldn't care about the Rabia because we don't do it like that.
Based off of the Gra's explanation.
Based off the Gra's explanation, right? Yeah. Okay. Achein. So here comes a move. Achein. Therefore, yesh lomar. We must say lahamachaber that according to the Shulchan Aruch, af shelo pasak shehanusach hu shehayom v'chulei knus haravia. That even though we don't paskin with that, the text is shehayom. We don't go like the Rabia. Mikol makom, nevertheless, bazeh modeh, the Beis Yosef is acknowledging Leila haravia, the Sefiras Omer hi miguf hachavta shel habracha, that he's agreeing with the Rabia that Sefiras Omer is considered part of the bracha. Okay, I'll explain it in a second. I'll explain it now. In other words, like this. We say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvah Sefiras Omer, period, Hayom Echad b'Omer, Rishon b'Omer, Hayom Sheni b'Omer, right? But he's saying that the Beis Yosef holds that when we say that, it's still part of the bracha, even though you don't formulate it as Shehayom Kach v'Kach. Okay?
No, we're just on a connector.
We don't use a connecting word, right? Okay. But the question is, how do we know that the Beis Yosef actually holds this? Okay, so
because he's quoting.
Okay, well, so like this. That's how he knows it. But how can we be sure? Like, are there proofs? Okay, okay. So he quotes the Shulchan Aruch here, which I already wrote down the source. You don't need to write this down. Check out if you look in the actual Shulchan Aruch what it says. Okay. Now, in the way this format works is, you know how the Ramah goes in and adds in terms in brackets whenever, like, Ashkenazim differ from the Beis Yosef. So check out the halacha here. B'leil sheni achar tfilas arvis, on the second night of Pesach after Mariv, maschilin lispor hayomer, we begin to count the omer. Vim shachach lispor mitchilas b'tchilas alayla holach v'sofer kol alayla. If you forgot to count at the beginning of the night, you can count the rest of the night. U'mitzvah el kol echad lispor la'atmo, it's a mitzvah for each person to count for himself. B'tzarich lispor me'umad ulvarach tchila, you need to count while standing up, and you need to make the bracha first. V'sofer hayamim im v'hashvos, and you count the days with the shvos. Okay, ketzad. Okay, so this is funny. But here, how do you count? You say by Yom Harishon Omer, on the first day you say Hayom Yom Echad. Ramah goes the Omer. Okay, Ad Shemigia L'Shiva Yamim, until you get to 7 days of Az Yomer, and then you say Hayom Shiva Yamim Shem Shvua Echad, and then the Ramah goes the Omer. Uviyom Shmini Yomer Hayom Shmona Yamim Shem Shvua Echad V'Yom Echad. Ramah adds ba'omer. V'chein Ashi Agila Arba Asar Yomer Hayom Arba Asar Yamim Shem Shnei Shavos, and then the Ramah adds ba'omer. So what do you see that is different between the way we are noheg to count and the way the Shulchan Aruch is noheg to count?
It's the ba'omer part.
We include the ba'omer part.
Oh,
right?
He's doing it for our he's what's the word? Acknowledging our.
The Ramah is the one who, in other words, the Ramah is the one who says that we say ba'omer, right? But according to Shulchan Aruch, how do you count the Omer? All you say is today is 14 days.
Right.
Today's 15 days. You don't mention the Omer at all. Okay. So what's weird about that?
Well, it's weird. It's weird to only count, and if the whole point of this for the Omer, why wouldn't you include the Omer?
Exactly, right? You would think it's essential you have to mention the Omer, right? Now check out this brilliant move here. Okay,
you're not just counting days.
Yeah, you're not just counting days, right? I mean, how do we even know that you're referring to the Omer? Maybe I'm referring to like days until my birthday or something like that, So check out this ingenious move here. Okay, so the Rav quotes everything that we just said. He says, "Hine hishmit hamachaber tevas ba'omer miguf hasfira." The mechaber omits the word ba'omer from the count itself. Elamone ach v'rak es cheshbon hayamim b'vad. The only thing he counts is just the number of days. V'harama higia alav. The Rama corrects him. Sham lomar ba'avur. Sorry, ba'omer, not ba'avur. Ba'omer k'minhag didan. So the Rama adds the word ba'omer like our minhag ein sham. U'lechoret tzarich iyun b'tameh de hamachaber ma'amahani hasfira shel hayamim. Seemingly, we need to understand the reasoning of the mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch. Ma'amahani hasfira shel hayamim. What benefit is there to count the days? Im eno mefarish shekavanas alimei ha'omer. If his intent is, if he doesn't explicitly say that it's the Omer. Okay, so can you guess what the answer is going to be?
Ask the question again.
Yeah, so the question is, how can the Mechaber say that when you count the Omer, you don't actually say the word Ba'omer? How do we know what kind of count it is? How can the Ramah and the way we do it makes sense because we say today is 14 days of the Omer. But according to the Mechaber, you just say today's 14 days. So how does that even register as counting the Omer?
Right. Why did it omit the Omer?
Because it's connected to the bracha.
Because it's connected to the bracha. Okay, so the Rav says ulam. Ulam lamashe nizkar. Nomar, I don't know. Degam hamachaber hasfira hi davar echad im habracha. So, but according to what we said, that according to the mechaber, the sphira and the bracha are one thing. Asi shapir, then it all makes sense. Shari kvar hiskir as omer babracha, because you mentioned the omer in the bracha. So in other words, it only the method of the Shulchan Aruch of not mentioning the omer only makes sense if you assume that the bracha and the count are one entity. So even though he doesn't go as far as the Raviyah to actually put the count into the bracha, it's one action of counting, of blessing and counting.
Does Spartan say it like that?
It's funny because I thought not. But let me look. Do we have a Chazan Ezos? Azus?
Is that what the Ezos last name is?
What?
Is that what the Ezos last name is?
From Azus, yeah, I think so.
Oh.
So this is the holiday edition for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Let's see how they say it.
It makes more sense, I think, to do it this way, to include it all as one thing.
Why? Yeah, why?
Because, well, for two reasons. Like one, it is redundant to then stop and then say a new thing, and repeat, and it's for the Omer. And then 2, for other brachas, like when you do for food, the particular food bracha is still included as part of the whole bracha.
Yeah.
If we're going with the idea that it's, even in my other idea where like I was saying there's 2 parts to a bracha.
Yeah.
There's the beginning part, and then there's, even that's still a bracha. I'm still saying that.
Right.
So it just seems like, why would we separate them into?
So I'll tell you why I think it is still weird, and I don't know if the Rav addresses this. Okay, which is that, let's take Kiddush. Okay, so what is Kiddush? I'm going to read what I should have read yesterday, which is the Rambam's formulation of the mitzvah of Kiddush. This is in Shabbos, Perek Chaf Tes, Halach Aleph. By the way, Seattle Sfardim at least don't do like the shulchan. They say la omer. Why am I going to?
Is that what that is?
Yeah, this is the Chazan Ezos holiday edition of the Seattle Sephardic Siddur, but there's a regular edition also. Okay. Mitzvahs aseh min Torah lakadesh Yom HaShabbos b'devarim. So there's a positive mitzvah of the Torah to sanctify the Yom HaShabbos with words. Shneimar, as it says, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos lakacho. You shall remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. Klomar, what does this mean? Zochrehu zechiras shevach v'kiddush. You have to mention the day of Shabbos with a mentioning of praise and sanctification. Okay, so the mitzvah is to basically single out Shabbos for praise and sanctity. So it makes sense that it is in a bracha, because when you bless Hashem and you thank him for creating this day of Shabbos, it like you're praising God for creating Shabbos, you know. But counting the Omer, why would they set it up to say it as part of a bracha? You know, like it just to me doesn't make sense that it would be. You're counting. You know, you're doing an act of counting, basically counting from Pesach until Shavuos, or counting from the bringing of the Omer until Shtei Lechem. Like, how does that idea have anything to, like, why would they incorporate it into praising God? Like, it's not an act of praising, you know, it's an act of counting.
Why is the counting not also praising?
Why is the counting a praising? Burden of proof is on you.
Because it was a mitzvah that we were given. And so it's enough, the fact that he even gave us a mitzvah to do is already something we praise him.
Yeah, that's why we say a bracha. But why wrap this into the bracha?
Because that's the form that the bracha, that's what that's like the whole essence of what it's about. It's like, that's why we say the food is also wrapped.
Well,
the bracha.
No, because the food, by food, you're right. By the food, the essence is the entire act of praise that you're doing is praising God for creating the food. Right. Okay. In a regular Birkas mitzvah, you're praising God for giving you the opportunity to do this mitzvah, and then you're doing the mitzvah. So let's take again our tefillin example. I say I'm praising God for giving me this mitzvah, and then the act of putting on tefillin is not praising God. It's doing the thing that I was praising God for.
You're saying that the counting is the act.
The counting is the act, right?
Separate act. Okay.
Right. So in the case of Kiddush, you can understand Kiddush.
And why then is so the act in the food is just the eating it. But why don't we just say generically for food then? Why do we then specify what type of food?
That's true for all praises of God. That there's the drasha is I'm blanking it. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. Bless Hashem each and every day. And then the Chazal say, Tein lo me'ein berachosav, give him like the appropriate bracha for each day. And I think that's the source of why we don't just say shahakal on everything. It's a better shavach if you say it categorically about what you're doing, you know. But either way, you have, you know, praising God for food, and then the act of eating the food. Then you have praising God for doing the mitzvah, then you have the act of the mitzvah. Then you have praising God for commanding us and counting the Omer, and then the act of counting the Omer.
Well, can you say that each day it's a different mitzvah? It's not just that you're doing the mitzvah of counting, but the mitzvah of counting day one, and there's a separate, and there's the mitzvah of counting day two.
Right, but so even according to that, which some Rishonim do hold, then there's why would they formulate? Now, see, my question is coming from the fact that this is an anomaly. Okay, we have many mitzvahs, and we say Birkas a mitzvah on many mitzvahs. Why only here and Kiddush? I don't know if those are the only ones, but why only here and Kiddush? did they incorporate the act into the bracha itself? That's why I'm saying the burden of proof is on you. Like they should do this according, they should do this for every mitzvah, any mitzvah that is about speech. Let's say Haggadah, right? So we should start, instead of reading the entire Haggadah, we should say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and then tell the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim in the form of the bracha, and then conclude at the end, or Megillah, what? Right, Megillah. Why don't we say Asher Kisham B'Mitzvah Al Mikra Megillah, which says, and then we read the whole Megillah. Why is it incorporated into the thing itself? So that's the question. I don't know if he's going to answer, but I would want to answer in order to explain this.
Maybe that should be how it is. Then you really would have to focus. You couldn't otherwise you do this on the bracha,
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people could focus for that long. But yeah, I think I'll create a lot more problems. Yeah, it's true. Okay, but now we finally get to the Rambam. So what we get from here is he's saying that the Shulchan Aruch also holds that the counting is part of the bracha, even though it's not part of the text of the bracha. Right? Even though it comes afterwards, it's still part of the act of bracha. Okay, now we get to the Rambam. So let's re-ask our question from the Rambam before we read it in the Rav. I already wrote this down also. So the Rambam said, "Sarich levarech b'chol laila baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivah al sefiras ha'omer kodem sheyispor." Okay, great. Mana v'lo berach yatsa ve'eno chozer u'mavarech. If he counted without blessing, he's yotze, and he doesn't have to go back and say another bracha. Okay, so our question was, what is the havamina? Why would you think you have to go back and say another bracha? Or why would you think you're not yotze? Okay, and in fact, the Kesef Mishnah says this, okay, and this is an interesting thing that there's a difference, this is a good example of how there's a difference between the Brisker Derech and the Kesef Mishnah Derech. Okay, look what he writes. And by the way, Kesef Mishnah is also Rabbi Yosef Karo. Okay, V'tzarech levarach b'chol laila. It's obvious that you make a bracha on it like you do all the other mitzvahs. Okay, so he's bothered by it, but he doesn't answer why the Rambam says it then. Umasha Kasav, and what the Rambam wrote, Manav lo berach yata, that if you counted and didn't make the bracha, you're yotze. Pashudhu. It's obvious. The brachos ain't a ma'akvos. Brachos are not ma'akev. So he's acknowledging the question, but he doesn't give an answer.
He's not trying to form a svara.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Like, in other words, he's bothered enough to be like, okay, Ram, why are you doing that? Okay, whatever. And then he just goes on, But the Rav is not contented. So here's what the Rav says. Vine kasav haramam beperek zayin. Yeah. Coming to Mata halacha chaf beis. V'tzarech levarech. No, so that's not coming to Mata. That's Tmiidin and Musafin. V'tzarech levarech b'chol laila asher kishan b'mitzvosav al sefiras ha'omer manav lo berach yata. V'tzarech bir. We need to explain this. Ma ba haramam lelamdina. What's the Rambam coming to teach us? Bazeh with this. Sh'im lo berach yata. What's the Rambam coming to teach us by saying if you didn't make the bracha, you're yotze? Ha kavar kazav haramam beperek yud alaf hilchos halacha hey mihilchos brachos to have brachos in a ma'akos as a mitzvos. The Rambam already said earlier in the Rambam we tried to find and didn't find that the brachos are not ma'akev the mitzvah, meaning that if you fail to say the bracha, you're still yotze the mitzvah. So why would the Rambam have to reassert that here? The imkain lama kafal hacha gabi sefiras ha'omer deyata afa pishlo birach. Why would the Rambam repeat here regarding sefiras ha'omer that you're yotze even though you didn't make a bracha? Okay, here's the move. V'nira. It seems the Harama ba la'afuke mashakasav haravia udiine. The Rambam is coming to la'afuke to exclude the Ravia's svara, okay, and those who support him. The sphere le'shasfir he chel mitofes bracha, who holds the Ravia, who holds that the counting is part of the text of the bracha. The kol takanas spheres omer hu betofes shel bracha, como kiddush v'havdalah da amirasu hu b'matbeah shel bracha. That whole svara. V'hinei lefi shitos elu nira de brachos ma'akos. According to those opinions, brachos are ma'akev. So in other words, the Rambam is not writing to just say the halakha, because we know the halakha from earlier in the Mishneh Torah. He's saying, don't think that the Ravia is correct, okay, or the Ravia or the Shulchan Aruch or those who hold like that. Don't think that the counting is part of the bracha. Yeah.
If you're saying the Shulchan Aruch also hold like that, you did not give that as an answer. Just like
I know, right?
That,
yeah.
Both saying that and saying the Shulchan Aruch. Basically, saying the Rambam says to be yotze from the Shita Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah.
But the Shulchan Aruch has his own commentary on the Rambam.
Right.
Say.
Okay. So this gets to the point where this is a good methodology point here. Okay. So I don't think you were here when you said this. You asked me a question before Pesach.
It's like a bit more, let's say, deep, like do do we care what the original idea was so much as what conclusions we derive from it?
Yeah. Do we care about what the original idea was or the conclusions we derive from it? So what I mean, or what we mean by that is, so I'll give you an example and a joke. Okay, so the example is, Johnny does videos on Arcane analyzing it. So he did a Q&A a little while ago. Yeah. Yeah. So he's a couple of people asked him, like, are you like, do you ever think that you're just going like too deep into what they're saying? Like, there's no way the author thought that, and so Johnny said, my job in analyzing this is not to figure out what the author had in mind or what the writers of the show had in mind or not. He said, what I want to know is, why does it work? Okay. In other words, writing, when you write stuff, if you're a fiction writer or whatever, even maybe nonfiction, but a fiction writer, like, the creative process involves a lot of conscious thinking and a lot of unconscious imagination.
Right, they
may not have intended to. And maybe if you ask them, they would
into some meaning that
right. Maybe they would even deny it. But Johnny says, like, all I know is when I see a scene and it really works, I want to know, like, as a writer, what made it tick, like what made it work. And if the writer didn't know, Socrates says in the Socrates says in the Apology, when he's the oracle tells him that he's the wisest man, and he says that can't be true, and he goes around asking all the people. So he first goes to the people who have a reputation for chachma, and he finds out that they're not wise, and then he goes to the poets, and he says about the poets, he says they didn't know what they were saying, even though they're saying words of wisdom. Like, he says, there's wisdom in their words, but they had no idea how they produce it, and it's some kind of like inspiration, So that's one example. And then the joke, which I think I mentioned to you earlier, is the I don't know if you've heard this joke before, but I'll tell you. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik goes to Shemayim, okay, and he meets the Rambam. He's like, oh, finally, I get to go over all my sefiras, with the Rambam. So like he raises a kushya that he wrote a Rav Chaim on, and the Rambam like gives this this answer, which is not what Rav Chaim said. And Rav Chaim's like, okay, fine, let me do another one. So he goes, he raises another question. The Rambam like gives this like simple answer, and like Rav Chaim's like, it's not what he said. Eventually, Rav Chaim goes like, he points to the Rambam, goes like, this guy doesn't know how to learn a Rambam. So similarly, so what Yosef is pointing out here is we saw the Kesef Mishnah, who is the Shulchan Aruch, just like astonished by why the Rambam is making this redundant halacha, and he doesn't answer it. The Rav, giving a svara for the Rambam, says, yeah, the Rambam is basically trying to exclude the Shulchan Aruch's view, and Yosef is saying, well, if this is really the Shulchan Aruch's view, then the Shulchan Aruch should have known that the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch should have said, yeah, the Rambam is only writing this because he holds like the Raviyah, which I also hold like, and like, it's, yeah. So what's the answer? The answer is that's not what the Rav is trying to do when he's coming up with the svara. He's trying to define the halacha conceptually, regardless of whether that is what the actual person held. Just like if you have a what do you call? Like, this is another weird example. Let's say Isaac Newton is trying to explain something in physics, okay, and he gives an explanation that works. Okay, like for example, I know people say this, I don't know exactly what this means. Newtonian physics was enough to get us to the moon, right? We figured out how to get to the moon just based on principles from Newton. Okay, but Einstein comes along, physics shifts, and then quantum comes along, physics shifts, and it turns out that like physics is not what Newton thought, and we understand gravity maybe in a different way now, right? So does that mean that Newton was like wrong? Well, in one hand, he was wrong, right? His svara was incorrect.
His explanations for the causes were wrong, but the
mechanics, right. Yeah, no, mechanically, he had the right equations or whatever, but his grasp of what he was working with was lacking. Similarly here, the Rav would say, yeah, the Mechaber, paskined this way, and he wrote this on the Rambam. That's the halachic data, but here's a svara that explains it, even if they didn't know it. Yeah.
Like modern physicists were probably better at Newtonian physics than Newton.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. That was a good methodology point, though. I think that's important.
I actually like that because it makes it so that when you say what's so and so svara,
yeah,
you're not necessarily asking what's him.
What was he thinking? Yeah.
It's almost like you're asking about the svara itself as its own organism.
Exactly. Right. And that is the Brisker Derech. Yeah. Right. There's a good shiur that Rabbi Zimmer gave a couple years ago called "Was the Rambam a Brisker?"
Yeah.
And he argues no, but that's not a degradation to the Rambam. That's Rav Chaim came up with a system of and a methodology that expressed these things in terms of the analogy I like to use is like Aristotle, factually speaking, Aristotle invented logics, like the study of logic. Now, does that mean that people before Aristotle didn't think logically? Of course not. He invented the system and the terminology and the classification, and made it usable. Reb Chaim, so formalized it, right? So the Rishonim were thinking conceptually. Does that mean they were thinking as briskers? No, they were thinking conceptually, and Reb Chaim came along and made that into a formalized science. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so that's what his shita is for the Rambam, that the Rambam only had to say this to reject the other svara. Dihine kvar hivanu dehataz heir al haravia ich shaykh lomar detzarech lachzor levarech. So we already cited earlier that the Taz commented on the Ravia saying, how is it relevant to say that you need to go back and make a bracha, right? The Taz was also bothered by the Ravia. Halo kvar sifar hasfira karoi. Didn't you already count correctly? Right? That was the question. Is like you got it wrong, but why would you ever need to count again with a bracha? Just like do the right count.
Okay, so just to recap. So
yeah.
Who said that it's obvious?
The Taz said that. Oh no, sorry. The Kesef Mishneh that we were just reading on the Rambam. Yeah.
Kesef Mishneh basically falls like the
Ravia.
That it's one whole bracha.
Right.
The whole thing's a bracha.
Right. The only difference is he doesn't put it into the bracha, but he says it's one act of bracha and counting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He just doesn't put shit, but it's
yeah.
So therefore, for him, it's obvious because. Okay, fine, because it's part of one whole bracha.
Well, he's not. Keep in mind, he's not explaining. He's explaining the Rambam's words. He's saying that in the Rambam's framework, it should be obvious, even though the Rambam doesn't agree with the Ravia. The Ravia holds you do go back and count. The Rambam holds you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's saying, well, for sure. Oh, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if it's the Ravia's way, it would be deraisa.
Right.
Then you should go back.
Then not only would it be obvious, it would be wrong. Right. Yeah.
So according to Rambam, he's saying, well, of course Rambam thinks it's he shouldn't because it doesn't see this. He's the second part is the rabbinic part that he's doing. It's no longer part of the bracha anymore. It's just accounting.
Yeah.
Sorry. Right. So the bracha itself you don't have to repeat. Just the counting, I guess you would repeat naturally.
Right. If you got counting wrong, you would count the right account.
Right.
Yeah.
So then now we're saying, well, the Rambam knows that it's obvious, but he's saying it to emphasize or to clarify that it's because he's not holding the way that the Ravia holds about what the bracha and the action.
Yeah, like if you went to the Rambam, you said, Rambam, isn't it obvious you wrote this earlier in Hilchos Brachos? He'd say it's not obvious to everyone, and then he'd make eyes at the Ravia,
Right.
Yeah. This is also just another methodology point here. There's a difference between the way that briskers read the Rambam and the way that I think pure Rambamists read the Rambam. Pure Rambamists read it as the Rambam is only writing what is necessary, and briskers hold that the Rambam is also writing in order to convey a conceptual understanding of the halachos. So if you were saying that the Mishneh Torah is purely an instructional guide, then there should be no need for the Rambam to write this because he already wrote it in Hilchos Brachos. But the brisker way of reading it, which I agree with in this case, is that it's clarifying the nature. He is clarifying something about how to think about the relationship between the bracha and counting the omer. And apparently, it's an interesting thing. Apparently, the svara of the Ravia is enough of a real hava mina that the Rambam has to reject it,
Right.
Yeah.
And then for that idea that he is also explaining what was the second thing? So besides being just pure
instruction manual versus a clarifying the concepts, a conceptual.
Okay,
yeah.
so we could even say based off like an Johnny example.
Yeah.
If he doesn't even, we could even say that even if he's not purposely trying to explain the conceptual framework, he still ends up explaining it.
Right. Yeah. It'd be like if you asked somebody who had like a very clear theory in their own mind, you ask them to talk about it. The way that they talk about it and what they say and what they don't say might be dictated by their conceptual position, even if they're not consciously in the moment saying like, I'm telling you this because of my conceptual position. Like, they're just talking about it naturally.
It's a really hard thing to like be aware that you're doing. Like,
yeah, right. Like I'm sure if you're explaining crypto to someone, who has an argument, who has a different position on certain fundamental basics, you're just going to talk naturally until they call you out on something. Like, why did you say it this way? And then you have to unpack the premises. Right, yeah. Right. Okay, let's go on. So he's saying the Taz also raised this question. The Taz raised the point of like, why should you have, he says, why would you make another bracha? Al kain im safar b'vlo birach tzarich lachzor levarach v'lisbor kadei l'kaim tekanas chazal she'asfira tiyeh b'soch matbeah shel bracha. So that's what forced us to say that the Ravia holds that Chazal set up the sphera to be part of the text of the bracha, and therefore if you counted and didn't make a bracha, you would need to go back and count with the bracha in order to fulfill Chazal's takana. Just like if you made kiddush without doing it in the form of a bracha, you still be chayav and kiddush. You just have to make kiddush again. L'shitasam habracha ma'akebes es hamitzvah. According to that shita of the Ravia, the bracha is ma'akev the mitzvah, and this is just all spelling out what we already said. U'kamoshe b'kiddush ein yotze midurabanan below toves shel bracha. Just like with kiddush midurabanan, we can't be yotze without the format of the bracha. U'kamochin hu l'das ha'mechaber. Same thing with the mechaber. Ta'af she'ein omer shehayom. Even though the mechaber doesn't hold that we say Shehayom, connecting it in one sentence. Nevertheless, the counting is part of the bracha. Okay, that's just spelling out everything we just talked about. Okay, no new points there. Almost done. Oh, this is a big nafkamina. According to the Ravia and those who hold like him, it seems she'ein onim amen achar birkas hashatz. We would not say amen after the chazan says the birkas mitzvah. Ella rak achar sheyisayim gam esfiras haomer gufa. Only after he counts the sphera itself. Sheyomar shehayom yom echad. Az yomru kol hakahal amen. Then we all say amen because it's the same part of the same text. Yeah. The uminhag didan, our minhag she'onim amen miyad, that we say amen immediately. Who al pi shitas haramam b'harama. Our minhag follows the Rambam and the Rama hanizker le'el de'in hasfira migufa bracha, who hold that the counting is not part of the bracha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is another thing, by the way. In order to so the greatest test of a svara. There's different ways to test a svara, right? So one way is, I don't even call this a test. If it fits the data, right? That's the basic criterion of the svara. But it also has to have a certain conceptual elegance, okay? It also has to be consistent with whoever you're trying to explain. Like if we found out that the Ravia explicitly said contrary to this, then that would invalidate the svara, okay? But this sets up a type of thing where like, it sets up like I call it halachic archaeology, where like, if we found, let's say you found a siddur from the Ravia's shul, I don't know if this exists, but let's say you found a siddur from the Ravia's shul and he printed amen after the sphera, that would be a good raya, that would be a good proof, Whereas if he said amen after the bracha, but before the counting was done, that would be a knock against this svara, So like it's fun to engage in that type of halachic archaeology. Yeah. Or more, I call it more like it's more akin to like investigative journalism of like, seeing whether this actually, you're claiming, Rav Soloveitchik, that the Ravia would hold that you wait until after the shot is done with everything to say amen. Did he actually do that or not? If there were a way to find out.
Surprising he doesn't even teach that. Like consistency is aware that not everybody holds that way. So So you would think that you would give that.
So I think that's more certain Rishonim you could hold them to that, and certain ones you couldn't. So, for example, the Rambam writes a lot about minhagim and tefillah and what people would and wouldn't do, or the Machzor Vitri, who was Rashi's student, who wrote Hilchos Tefillah stuff, and Abu Diram. The Raviyah was really a Gemara commentary, I think, Chidushim. So I don't know if we would expect him to do that. Yeah. Okay. Next,
I guess that the Ramah didn't either. It's weird.
Well, the Ramah, the Ramah, according to the Ramah, you wouldn't need to say it because it would be like any other bracha the Shad says. But the Mechaber should have done it. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, right. V'ayin od b'shulchan Aruch. So let's see furthermore in the Shulchan Aruch. I already wrote this down also. Taf Pei Tes Dalid. Let's see Taf Pei Tes Dalid, who says, Misha Shoel also Chavero Ben Hashmashos Kama Yemei Hasfira. This is a well-known halacha. Someone who asks his friend while during twilight, right, between sunset and nightfall, Kama Yemei Hasfira Bezeh. What's the sphere count? Halala. Yomor Lo. He should say to him, Etmol Hayakach. Yesterday was such and such. She'im Yomor Lo Hayom Kach v'Kach. Eno Yachos Lachzor V'Limnos Bivracha. Then you can't go back and count with a bracha. Right, this is a halacha where someone asks you what's the day of the Omer tonight. You should say yesterday was such and such, right? Aval kodem ben hashmashos, but before sunset, kevin she'ein zman sfira ein bekach klum. Then you can tell, like I can tell you right now what night tonight's going to be, because that doesn't matter. I can't be yotzei tonight's counting before tonight, right? But if it's already tonight, and you ask me what night it is, and I say, oh, tonight's blah blah blah, so then I'm already yotzei.
And problematically, you were over on the running.
Yeah. So the question is going to be,
which is why you don't want to do that,
right? Right. So the question. So I think the question is going to be. So according to the Raviyah, this shouldn't be a problem, right? If I said, let's say it's nightfall and I haven't counted yet, and I say, oh, by the way, just so you know, tonight is 18. According to the Raviyah, no problem at all because I didn't say it as a bracha, right? So there's no way I can be yotzei according to the Raviyah because it has to be part of the bracha. Oh. Right? But according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's interesting. He's saying you would be yotzei.
There you go. There's another reason why it makes more sense to do it as a one.
Oh, yeah. It'd be convenient. Okay. So let's see what he says. Okay, yeah, convenience, That's like
That's just convenience, but it's normal. Like you're not having to talk like this,
Yeah, you would definitely be able to answer it in a normal way. That's true. Yeah. It reminds me of, I might have told this anecdote before, but yeah, when I was going over with I think it was 9th graders, it was a Q&A, and they asked, is my, they said like, I had a pet dog that died. Is my dog going to be, am I going to be reunited with my dog in Olam Haba, So I said, well, there's machlokas on what Olam Haba is. According to the Rambam, Olam Haba is completely non-physical. Right. And according to the Rambam, then only the only thing that lasts is your soul, your Telem Elokim, and animals and plants and other things don't have a Telem Elokim. They have what he calls a neshama, which in the Rambam's terminology is like the soul that gives you like physical life. So according to the Rambam, there wouldn't be no dogs in Olam Haba. However, according to the Ramban, who holds that Olam Haba is another term for Yemos Mashiach, it's in Olam Hazeh, okay? And if Mashiach comes while you're still alive and your dog's still there, you'll be able to have your dog in Olam Haba because he'll be around for Mashiach, right?
Meaning in this kid's case, no, because he's already.
If the dog's already dead, yeah, right, yeah. So I was just saying, maybe I think I'm getting two things mixed up. I think that this is a kid whose dog wasn't dead yet, and so that's why I was giving her that answer,
Although I guess the question of being reunited still, like.
Right, yeah, that would be like a Tchias Mason question, right? Yeah. So then anyway, so I gave her this thing, and she says, "Oh, well, I think the Ramban is right," And I said, you shouldn't make metaphysical truth decisions on the basis of whether there are puppies, or dogs, and it reminds me of that. Okay. Umakor hadvarim. So the source of the Mechaber's psak of not telling your friend what day it is if you're in the Zman of Sfira, who mi Abu Diram demaisi habeis Yosef al pi lashon haramam shiman of lo berach yata. So okay, so the Beis Yosef. This is going to get drama here. Okay, this ruling in the Shulchan Aruch comes from the Abu Dirim cited by the Beis Yosef, but it's based on the Rambam's statement that if you counted without a bracha, then you're yotze. Achin, thus, iyun beBeis Yosef bamesh demaisim mehamachzor vitri demashma depalik b'zeh. I'm going to finish reading the sentence, then I'll explain. Look at what the Machzor Vitri, what the Beis Yosef cites from the Machzor Vitri, which implies that he argues with this. And the Machzor Vitri is brought in the Shulchan Aruch, which says that if you count, that he should count with the congregation without a bracha. Uvalayla choser umavarach, and then at night he should go and count with a bracha. Ubir begra the hamachzor vitri sfirle da bracha hu leikuva. The Gra explains that the machzor vitri holds that the bracha is ma'akev. Kamol inyan brachos kriyashma, just like brachos kriyashma. Hine bebir hagrab sinva bir de laharavia da sfira hi chelak mina bracha havi kebrach birkas kriyashma. So much flying around here. The Gra. I got that's why I got to read all the way through and then go back. And the Gra explains in Siman Vav that the according to the Ravia that Sefira is part of the bracha, then it's like the brachas of Kriya Shema Ayin Sham. L'chora near lefizeh the Haravia be'emes cholik alzeh. So it seems like the Ravia would disagree with this. Usfirli de brachos leikuva and hold that the brachos are ma'akev. V'kol shelo birach leolam yachol lachzor v'limnos bebracha. And as long as you hadn't made a bracha, you can always go back and count with a bracha. V'tzarich iyun. Here's this question. Tzarich iyun b'das maran hamachaber shepasak kashtei shitos. Okay, this is what I thought the question is. I don't know why he needs to go into all of that. Here's the question. We've established so far that the Ramah holds like the Ravia in that the counting is part of the bracha, and that he does not hold like the Rambam and the Ramah, who hold that the bracha is one thing and the counting is another thing.
Right, you're in Shulchan Aruch on the verse, right?
Let me say it. Yeah, I'll say it again. The Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch, holds like the Ravia,
right?
That the counting and the bracha are one.
Right.
In contrast to the Rambam and the Ramah, who hold that the bracha is one thing, the counting is another thing.
Right.
So the Shulchan Aruch in the halacha we just read about how you should talk to your friend said that you should be careful to not say tonight is such and such, because if you did that, you'd be yotze and you couldn't count with the bracha. Okay, but that seems to be following the Rambam, right? That you could be yotze without a bracha. But if the Shulchan Aruch really held like the Ravia, then saying what night it is tonight, you would not be able to be yotze because you have to say the bracha and then say it. So it sounds like the Shulchan Aruch is poskening according to two shitos. He's poskening according to the Ravia about how you should count, but he's poskening like the Rambam in terms of worrying about like accidentally saying the day without the bracha.
Could it be like because it'd be like saying an incorrect bracha?
That's what I would think. I would. That's the way I would answer it, which is that that he's just being worried about the Rambam Shita. That according to the Rambam, you'd be saying a bracha levatala. Right. And furthermore, the Shulchan Aruch already said earlier that we hold that Sefira is derabanan, so we go safek brachos lekula, and we also are not machmir on the count itself. Yeah.
What does the Beis Yosef say?
What is the
Beis Yosef?
Yeah. So Beis Yosef says that okay, this is where I lost the citations here. That the Beis Yosef says that the source of this thing about like being careful how to say the night comes from the Abu Dirim, who gets it from the Rambam. So I think that's why the Rav cited it, because he's acknowledging that he himself got it from the Rambam. Abu Dirim is a Rishon who wrote about commentary and psak on tefillah. Yeah, I don't know when he was. I think he was like, I'm going to guess 100 years after the Rambam. I know they say it like that.
How long after the
1340?
The Tanaim or the Rishonim?
Tanaim were up until around the 3rd century CE, and the Rishonim were like 11th century CE. Oh, wow, yeah, good. Long time. Yeah.
I mean, for the part where we're saying that the Mechaber is like the Ravia, what's the Beis Yosef saying on that?
The part that we're saying with the Mechaber is like the Ravia, what is the Beis Yosef? Well, the Beis Yosef wouldn't say on the Mechaber because he wrote the Shulchan Aruch after.
What I mean with that is that if the Mechaber is just the short notes of Beis Yosef, then
right.
Then
So I'm making an assumption here, which we can check out if we have time. We have one more paragraph. Is that that if the Beis Yosef like commented on this directly in a way that was meaningful, then the Rav would have cited it. Okay. But we'll look at it after this paragraph, last paragraph now. The O nafkamina near Lashita Zo. There's another nafkamina according to this shita. Dehine iyun bebir halacha. Okay, see in the bir halacha. Pluksa derabusa imish shomeak one b'sfiras omer. Oh, interesting, right? Can you have shomeak one b'sfiras omer? So shomeak one is if you listen to something, then it's like you said it. So that's the mechanism by which when someone says kiddush, you're yote, right? So there's so for brachos, they have to have you in mind, and you have to have in mind to be yote through them. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, can you be yote sfiras omer through shomeak one? Okay. Ulefi haravia near de hanach shitos de lo mahani shmeik one b'sfiras omer ela de tzarich sfir lechol echad ve'echad hu adin de'in echad yachol lahoti es chavero bebracha al sfiras omer. So according to the Ravia, then the side that holds that that each person needs to count on their own also could not be yotze through the bracha on sfiras omer, because since he holds it's one thing. Then if you need to count sfira on your own, that means you need to do the entire thing. So let's say like, common remedy, let's say you miss one night of Sefiras Omer, one night and day in its entirety. So you can no longer count with a bracha. So the advice they give you is like, biyote through someone else's bracha and then count. But according to the Ravia, you couldn't do that. Yeah. He says, the habracha vasfir chadhu.
Why again can we not? Is it you can no longer?
So that's I'll answer that in one time. Just to finish the sentence here. Da bracha v'asfira chadhu, because he holds the bracha and the sfira are one. U'kshem shesfira l'chol echad ve'echad kach bracha ba'inen l'chol echad ve'echad. And just like you need sfira for each and every person, so too you need bracha for each and every person. So the thing about why we hold that you don't, if you missed a full night and day, then you can't say it with a bracha again. That's going based on a das yachid, like on a singular opinion, which is the Bahag. Bahag holds, I don't know if this is the way he says it, but it's like there's one mitzvah to count all 49 days. So if you miss one, you're not really doing the mitzvah anymore, but he's the only one who holds that. The Rambam holds that if you were to miss a day, so here's what the Rambam holds is, let's say, tonight, really, I'm supposed to count at the beginning of the night with a bracha. If I miss the beginning of the night with a bracha, I could count later on in the night with a bracha. If I don't remember till tomorrow, I can count tomorrow without a bracha and then go back to counting with a bracha at night. And if I miss an entire day, like night and day, then I can still go back the following day and count with a bracha again. And that's how my understanding is all Rishonim hold that except for the Bahag. So we are just machmir according to the Bahag, probably because it's a suffix with brachos, that we don't say it again. But it is a das yachid, it's a singular opinion. Yeah. We want to look at the Beis Yosef really quickly on the tour. What's the easiest way to do this? Let's go tour, and then the Beis Yosef. What case are we looking at? Oh, when you tell your friend. Yeah. Let's see if the tour even brings it down. Yeah. So the tour says im eno yodea hacheshbon. If you don't know the count, pasach hadaita the lasan. No, that's a different case. Oh, the tour doesn't bring it down. So the Beis Yosef might not talk about it. Let's see. Beis Yosef. Oh no, I mean, of course the Beis Yosef talks about it. That's what the what is this? There's two Beis Yosefs here. Beis Yosef and Beis Yosef l'tzorche ha'ataka. What does that mean? And what's the difference? I got to ask Rabbi Novetsky. Okay, fine. Chavero. Yeah, okay, so here's what he says. L'fikach tzarich lizahar mi. Wait, no. Of al Rambam kasav imana v'lo berach yatza. The Rambam wrote that if you counted and didn't make a bracha, you're yotze. V'chein ikar, and that's the main opinion. L'fikach tzarich lizaher mi sheshoal oso chavero kama yimei hasfira. Therefore, you need to be careful. If your friend asks you, what's the sfira count? Shiyomar lo, that you should say, etmol haya kach v'kach. You should say yesterday was such and such. Im omer lo hayom kach v'kach nimsa shekvar mana ve'ino yachol lachzor v'limnos bebracha. Then you need to be careful, because if you said that, then you wouldn't be able to go. You're yote and you can't go back and count with the bracha. V'davka kishi higias man hasfira. That's specifically if the time for sfira has arrived. Dahinu ben hashmashos, which is in the twilight. V'al im shal also mibod yom. But if he asks you during the day, The Amrle, and he says, Kama yihye lanu sefiras halayla, and he says, what is the count of spirit tonight? Yachol amar lo kaf v'kaf haim. You can say it's this count. Yeah. Okay, so he does explicitly quote the Rambam, but so that's why the Rav has the question about how can he possibly like the Rambam. Okay, that's good. So plan is next week we return to Hilchos Talmud Torah, finish the 6th chapter about kavod chachamim, and then go into the 7th chapter about excommunication. Yeah, and then hopefully finish that. Okay, very good. Have a good rest of the day.